So if you've made it here from YouTube rather than the blog, I'd like you to go click the link down below to go to the blog. It's more important this week than it is other weeks, and let the blog bring you back here because it sets the stage for this talk. And I want to just tell you in my words in this conversational way about the story that Hall ends the book on. And it's the story of Father Rodriguez, a Portuguese priest that was sent to the mission field in Japan in the 17th century. And the gospel, Christianity was not catching on in Japan. And let's recognize that could be an aversion to the gospel. It could be an aversion to just colonialism. You know, the Jesuits in particular, and he was a Jesuit missionary, did good things, but a lot of bad things. It was not a good time, and not the church's finest hour. And so anyway, they were pushing back, they were resisting, and pretty badly. So what was happening was Christians were being rounded up and asked to denounce their faith. And the way this was being done was there was these things called fumis, which were like, I think they were about the size of the book actually. A little bronze plaque with a picture of Jesus on the cross, and not a flattering image usually. And Christians were being asked to trample on these plaques as a way of renouncing their faith. And remember, this is a culture where even then they took their shoes off to go inside. So shoes were seen as really dirty. This was a real insult to the faith to trample something with your shoes on. So not only was it a renouncement, but it was insult to the faith as well. So Father Rodriguez was rounded up and asked to renounce his faith by treading on this fumi. And remember that a priest in the 17th century that went to the mission field had probably made his peace with the fact that he could become a martyr. So when they said, renounce your faith or die, okay, fine. But then he found out that they were torturing two of his friends to death, and that if he renounced, they would free these two people. And if he didn't, they'd die a really terrible death. And it's bad. I'll spare you the details. Now, a little side story about Father Rodriguez is that, here was a person that was steeped in sort of the height of religious art. And it had never spoken to him. He loved these beautiful paintings and everything. But he had actually said that he was disappointed that these paintings, he'd never heard the voice of Jesus through them. And he'd expected to. And this is in a book, Shusaku Endo wrote a book called Silence. And Hall actually quotes from the book. And so Father Rodriguez had not heard Jesus' voice in these paintings. But when he came into this situation, the face itself was concave, worn down with the constant treading. It was this concave face that looked at the priest in sorrow. In sorrow, it had gazed up at him as the eyes spoke appealingly. Trample, trample. It is to be trampled on by you that I am here. Your mileage may vary here. But growing up, I grew up in a community that was very much inspired and shaped by the evangelical community. I wouldn't say it was the majority, but it was a large group of the kids I grew up with were strongly evangelical. And in that community, it was important to sort of outwardly proclaim your faith and identify visually and vocally that this was your tribe. And in that atmosphere, I remember the conversation would come up occasionally of, if you were put in this position, what would you do? And can you imagine, a bunch of high school students in rural Ontario in 2005 talking about this? Like, this is a ridiculous situation. And the fact that we were having these discussions was just silly. But anyway, I remember these conversations would come up once in a while, and people would say, well, I'd proclaim my faith to the death no matter what. And I remember thinking, that's stupid. I've got some guilt about that, and I still kind of carry it, even though I disagree with it. But I remember thinking, if I just said, yeah, okay, fine, and trampled on the thing, and then continued to be a Christian, I mean, God's in my head. God sees the situation. God recognizes that the world is what it is. I didn't understand that, and I still don't. And there's going to be people that maybe find that alarming, but this story really spoke to me because of this experience that I've had. And the point that Hall's trying to make is that we believe in a relational faith. So a couple of chapters ago, he was talking about how if you want to find someone to explain, or if you want to find an explanation for who someone is, you got to find someone a few steps away. If you asked him to explain his spouse, he's too close to her. He knows that she's a nuanced human being that learns every day and changes and grows and has good days and bad days and learns things. And, he couldn't define her. The way that Hall knows his wife is because he has a relationship with his wife. He continues dialogue and talking and learning with her. If you wanted just sort of a definition of Hall's wife, you'd have to talk to someone that didn't really know her that well, because they could sort of put her in a simple box, right? And the point that he's trying to make in this chapter is that we can't define our faith. We just can't. It's too nebulous, and the second we define it is the moment that it's not it. It's over here. It's something else, because we've sort of cut it down and excluded, right? If it doesn't fit in this box, it's not going to. But Christianity can't fit in any box. And so he calls this chapter "The Face in the Space at the Center." So he's refused to define this thing in the center and talked all around it, but this center is this undefinable, squishy, nebulous thing, right? And so he's saying, okay, what can we use to say what this thing in the center is? And he suggests this face, the face of the Jesus on this fumie, that we can have a relationship with, that priests like Father Rodriguez can talk with. Father Rodriguez can tread on this face, but because he's in a constant relationship with Jesus, and therefore with everything, God, the world, I try not to define God for this reason, but Jesus is that relational face. So he can tread on it and then say, oh man, Jesus, that was a bad time, but I love you, right? And can continue to grow and learn and have that relationship. It's the same reason Peter could deny Jesus and go on to be the rock that the church was built on. Hall tries to make this point. He's talking about, in this last chapter, he goes on a bit of a tangent about people that want to boil the church down to, the good stuff. And, he talks about it kind of positively, like he admires these people, but he says, you can't, because even in boiling down, even in excluding the bad stuff and saying, this is it, let's just focus on this bit, you're defining it. By sharpening it to that point, even if it's sort of the best point, you're excluding other things. And yeah, so he's saying people are going to be people no matter what. We can try and focus on the good things, but it's still going to creep in that we think this, that, or the other thing. And we're still going to become exclusive. And he's saying we can't do that. We need to be relational. And so if there's going to be anything in this undefinable middle piece, it's going to be the face on that fumie. Because that is the face that understands how hard it is to be human and understands how hard it is to be better. He makes the case, he was talking about someone in the chapter that sort of assumed we could be better. And he says that's actually a specifically English European culture thing, to assume that if we just work hard enough, then things will get better. And he says it doesn't. It just doesn't. People continue being people. And if we have a relationship with Jesus, then we can work with that. But the second we start defining and putting our religion in boxes, then we become exclusive and we start hurting each other. And so as we close this series, the call is to be a relational church, to not be stuck on definitions, and to not do church out of fear. It's to be in relation with one another and with God. And, our God has chosen to give us a face that we can have a relationship with. It's the face and the space at the center.